Hope all of you are good, fine, doing well, and hope that all 6 domains that we have reviewed so far have been working out for you. That reviews are working out for you. Okay, it is 6 o'clock. Let's start. So yeah, hey everyone, this is Chandresh, and we are reviewing CISSP domain. We are doing a domain-wise CISSP review. So uh, all the domains which are covered in CISSP exam, we are reviewing it one by one. So far, we have reviewed 6 domains, and today we are going to review the 7th domain, which is security operations. I'm CISSP certified, and I also have been certified in ISO 22301, which is BCMS, and ISO 31000, which is risk management framework. A little bit about InfosecTrain. It was established in 2016, and we have more than 70 plus trainers who have trained more than 30,000 people so far. We have 200 plus courses offering. We have 150 plus corporate deliveries that we have made so far. We have 4+ years of experience in this field, and uh, we are partners with multiple training accreditation agencies, and we are serving in more than 20 plus countries. So yeah, that is what InfosecTrain is. And the best part about is we have the trainers which have hands-on industry experience, as well as we help you with your entire certification journey. So we help you with the content, we help you with the training which is required, which may be required. We help you with the entire journey. Our entire journey is uh, where we stay with you. So that is how we operate. These are our clients, the ones that I talked about. And moving on to the accreditation partnership that we may be having with the organizations is listed here. Moving on to the agenda of this session, we have already discussed in the beginning on the day one, on the first session, that there are 8 domains covered in CISSP test, and there'll be 100 to 150 questions. Although there is news that it is going to change in future, there'll be 4 hours allocated for 200 questions, but that is not written in stone yet. So ISC Square has not formalized it yet, but there was a news about it. So there's a impending change, and maybe it will be effected by June 1st. So if you're planning to get certified, I suggest you get certified before June 1st, because there'll be a shift in the pattern, and getting acquainted with the new pattern may take some time. So I advise you, if you're going to take if you're planning to get certified this year, plan it before June, because that is where the changes probably that is when the change is going to occur. So there are 8 domains, 100. So as of now, the present pattern is having 8 domains, and there'll be 100 to 150 questions. You'll be allocated with 3 hours. And if you why do I say 100 to 150 questions? That because if you score more than 70% in the first 100 questions, you don't need to solve any further questions. You don't need to solve it, and you'll be awarded you'll clear the certification, and after the verification of your experience requirement, you'll be awarded the certificate. So that is how it works. That is what has happened with me also. I cracked it in 100 questions. So yeah, in 90 minutes, in 100 questions. So it is not very difficult. You'll have to just strategize well. You'll have to focus on your objective, and that is all. It is easy. And anybody who's planning to get certified this year, plan it before June, because in June there is a change which is, I think, because there was a news that there's a change which IC Square is planning to implement in the way they conduct the examination, and adapting to the change will be a bit difficult, may require some more time. So your timeline will be stretched. So if you're planning to get it done this year, do it before June. We discussed about CIA triad, how's the confidentiality, integrity, and availability requirements of everything, all the resources that we are supposed to protect. That is what information system security is. And then we talked about frameworks. Frameworks basically standardize the whole operations, the whole efforts, and basically are a method of en ensuring interoperability across the board. Then we talked about risk management framework. Then we talked about risk assessment. There we also talked about risk analysis, which is basically analyzing one single threat against the entire all the threats pertaining to entire activity. We isolate one threat, we analyze it, all the possible vectors, And that is what risk analysis is. Risk analysis is more macro. Then we talked about RTP, which is risk treatment plan. So every organization has a risk appetite. When we do the risk, when we come to risk management framework, we identify the activities, we identify the risk associated with all these activities, and we then, and the organization then put forth the risk appetite that he may be able to, like the kind of the amount of risks that the organization is okay with, and that is where we put the controls to take the risk which is inherent in the system as of now down to the risk appetite of the organization. So risk appetite plus control is equals to the risk inherent risk which we have assessed in the entire risk management framework within the risk management framework. Then we talked about the kind of documents that are there. There can be policies, procedures, baselines, and guidelines. We talked about how policies are the overarching things. Then we have procedures, which are the very minute step-by-step guides kind of stuff for the technical people to implement the changes in the environment. Then we talked about baselines, how baselines are snapshot or point-in-time data, which is basically used for reference and which is constantly so all these documents must be updated constantly. So that is also something we talked about. Every document has its own life cycle. We have versioning control in that, and we also define the revision requirements associated with each and every document. So every document comes with its own life. So every document needs to be reviewed before the life is expired for that document. That is how we manage the life cycle of a document. Then we talked about asset inventory. We talked about classification, categorization, labeling, and marking, roles. The roles as in the kind of people that can be there in an organization. For example, data stewards, data owners, data custodians. So custodians are the technical people who are actually processing the requirements which are mentioned in the policies and whatnot. And owners are the people who are accountable uh, for the who are responsible for the system, for the particular system. And then stewards are the people who are there to validate whether the data is uh, the kind of data which is captured or stored is good for the organization or not, is of purpose, is in line with the purpose of the organization or not, stuff like that. And then we talked about system architectures, what are the security models out there, common criteria of evaluation. Then we talked about trusted computing based TCB. Then we talked about reference monitor and how to enforce reference monitor in a security kernel. Then we talked about cryptology. In cryptology, we talked about symmetric, asymmetric encryption. Then we talked about the implementation of PKI, how do we do that? We talked about root CA certificate authorities and whatnot. And that is how PKI functions. We've broken it down. Then we talked about IAM. There we talked about identity access management, basically. So we talked about the basic feature within IAM, that is IEEE or I4 times A sometimes, which is identity, I for identity, then authentication, authorization, and auditing. That is basically what IAM pertains to. And then we talked about Kerberos. Kerberos is one of the methods of authenticating users. So we talked about that, how we took upon what are the various moving parts in the Kerberos implementation. We talked about Active Directory, which uses Kerberos, Microsoft Active Directory, which uses Kerberos as one of the authentication methods. Then we talked about SAML, which is Security Assertion and Markup Language, which is also again tells us about the authentication of the user, to what extent the access can be granted to a user. That is what Security Assertion and Markup Language deals with. Then we talked about OpenID. Then we talked about OAuth. OpenID deals with generally identification and authorization to some extent, and OAuth generally deals with your authentication and authorization to some extent. And generally, it is implemented in an OpenID via OpenID Connect framework, which uses both the layers, OpenID and OAuth, to facilitate the entire stack: identity, access, identity, authorization, authentication. Sorry, identity, authentication, authorization, and that's how it was. Then we talked about metrics, metrics, basically KPIs and KRIs. Where one is forward looking, one is backward looking. For example, KPI, which is key performance indicator, you have already set an agenda, and then you take point in time data, metric today, and you measure whether we are moving towards the set agenda. That is your KPI. that is how you assess the performance of your efforts that you've put, the countermeasures or whatever controls that you've put in your environment. You must have had a vision with those controls in your mind, and that formulates the KPI. So KPI is backward-looking indicator, which you set before time, which you set somewhere back in time, and now you're constantly assessing your progress against the KPI indicators. Then KRIs are key risk indicators, which are forward-looking metric, which where you assess the risk that are there in the environment and what kind of controls you shall put in order to mitigate those risks if you choose to mitigate, because uh, there are multiple risk mitigation strategies also. You can either accept risk, mitigate risk, or you can avoid the risk, you can transfer the risk, stuff like that. So those are risk mitigation techniques. Then we talked about CVEs, CVSS, common vulnerability scoring system and whatnot. So we talked about how log4shell was there, and it was assigned with a CVE. CVE is basically the identity number, which ID number, which is assigned to a vulnerability which is out there in the wild. And CVSS is basically the severity rating, which is assigned on a scale of 0 to 10. So that is what CVSS was. Then we talked about parties involved in testing, that is first party, second party, third party, uh, or internal, external auditors, and third party auditors. So first party is obviously the internal, external is the second party, and third party is third party. Now today we are going to talk about the security operations, and typically what happens in your day-to-day security operations that you manage for an organization. But before that, as we have structured the sessions, we have structured it in a way that we discuss the questions pertaining to the last sessions that we have already had. So last 6 domains, there'll be I'll be giving you questions pertaining to the last 6 domains that we have discussed, and we'll I'll give you some time, say 10-15 seconds per question. You'll punch in your options, the options that you think are correct in the chat section. If there is a unanimous uh, if there is a unanimous win to one question, for example, if for question number 1 option B is correct, if all the people have punched in option B, we won't discuss about that question, because obviously all of the people already know about it, so there's no point in discussing that. But if there is a difference of opinion within the chat section, that as I'll be able to see, then we'll take up that question. I'll explain the question to you and how to answer such questions. I'll break it down for you. So this was the questions pertaining to the previous domains. Then we quickly jump into the domain 7 discussion, key concepts of domain 7, and we run through it. Then finally, the third section is where we discuss the questions pertaining to the domain 7, which will be discussed today. Okay, so first section is discussing questions from previous domain. Second section is when we discuss the domain 7, which is the domain for today's discussion. Third section is where we discuss the questions pertaining to the domain 7, and questions, the answering method will be the same. You'll punch in your responses in the chat section, and if there is a unanimous win, the discussion to that question will be skipped. If there is a difference of opinion, the question will be discussed. Finally, we'll dedicate some 10-15 minutes or whatever amount of time you require to discuss your doubts, or maybe any queries or any problems that you may be having throughout this session that we are having. And we dedicate that time, 10, 15, 20, 30, whatever amount of time you require, that amount of minutes will dedicate to the discussion of your problems, your questions, your doubts. Okay, so that is how I planned this session, and that is how we conduct it. Okay, so let's start with the questions pertaining to the previous domains that we have discussed so far. So the first question is, which of the following type of tests involve discursive exploration of existing response procedures based on a likely adverse scenario designed to determine if desired outcome will result? Your options are there, and you can punch in the options that you think are correct in the chat section. Your time starts now. You have 5 seconds. sorry, you have 10 seconds. And here it starts. So your 10 seconds are up. And as I can see in the chat section, most of the people have responded as C. So see what C is. C is, just give me a second. C is simulation test. What happens in a simulation test? Say you have already come up with a disaster recovery plan. You have a DRP. In a simulation test, what we'll do is we'll say that, okay, this is the calamity, this is the cause of disaster. Now the disaster has happened. Check out how your plan works out in that case. So what we are doing here is, in the question we are doing is type of test which exploration of existing response procedures based on likely adverse scenario. So the key word here is, key phrase here is exploration of existing response procedures. In a simulation test, you give a case, you give a scenario. So we generally discuss a scenario in a simulation test. So this is not there. Okay. What happens in a checklist test? You are the maker of a plan. You are the maker of disaster recovery plan, and you yourself have gone through all the things that you have enlisted therein. That is your checklist. So that is also not the case here. A structured walkthrough. A structured walkthrough. What it means is, walkthrough basically means is you call in all the stakeholders and you have a plan already ready. That is your plan. All the stakeholders discuss about your plan, and they then give you inputs to improve that plan. Okay, so that is also not the case. The case is, it is a tabletop exercise in which you take out your plan and we explore the responses which are already covered therein. Okay, so this deals with basically taking all the stakeholders. It was a close one. A was a close one, but it involves all the stakeholders which are there for contributing to your plan that you have already made. Okay, and this checklist deals with the author himself reading out the plan himself. Okay, cool. We'll move on to the second one. Which of the following attributes are added beyond traditional access mechanism, that is rule-based access control, mandatory access control, and discretionary access control, in order to implement ABAC, which is attribute-based access control? Your time starts now. You have 10 seconds. Punch in your answers. Okay, 10 seconds are up. And most people are correct. You add context to the equation for it to become an attribute based. Why B is not correct? Because basically this is your subject, this is your object, and this is your access control. Okay, so subject and object are inherent part of an access control. Those are already eliminated. Actions, I don't know. Actions will, I don't know how actions will be a right option. Somebody has given actions. So yeah, for an attribute based access control, you need to add context to the equation. Okay, the third one is the use of resource servers and authorization servers to enable a client web service to access a resource owner for federated authorization is a hallmark of what open standard? Your time starts now. Your time's up. Okay, so there is a divide again. There's a resource server which, so here's my user, which is trying to access this server, but the user is not having an identity stored in it. So this server doesn't know this user. This is my resource server, and this is my authorization server. My user is having an identity here. So this server knows the user, but this server doesn't know the user. When you use this ID in order to authenticate with this server, you're using OAuth. Sorry, authorize. The user is getting authorized with this identity which is stored in this server, on this server, which is where the user wants to access data from or have access to. So this is an example of OAuth implementation. Okay, this is a good one. Operating systems have evolved and changed over the years. The earlier operating systems were monolithic and did not segregate critical processes from non-critical processes. At, as time went on, operating system vendors started to reduce the amount of programming code that ran in kernel mode. Only the absolute necessary code ran in the kernel mode, and the remaining operating system code ran in the user mode. This architecture introduced performance issues, which required the operating system vendors to reduce the critical operating system functionalities to microkernels and allow the remaining operating system functionalities to run in client-server models within the kernel mode. So, which of the following best describes the second operating system architecture based on the scenario? Your time starts now. You punch in your answers in the chat section. Okay, your time's up. Again, there is a divide, so we'll discuss about it. First of all, let's eliminate it. Eliminate it. It is not a kernel based because kernel based, every operating system requires a kernel and a shell. So it's not, kernel based is not the right answer. The second operating system talks about first client server model and second microkernels. So it is not monolithic because monolithic contained everything in one package. So all is one, like Windows XP or something like that. So if any of the components of the OS fails, the entire operating system fails. We stand together, we fall together. That is how monolithic was. So monolithic is not the correct option. Kernel based is not a correct option. Layered also is not a correct option. This is an example of microkernel because layered is an model, is a model. It is not a type of operating system. Okay, let's move on to the next question. Which of the following best describes why there was a performance issue in the context-based scenario? Context of the scenario. Why was there a performance issue? Your time starts now. And your time is up. Again, there is a little bit divide. So what was happening here is they have given us the key distinction here that okay, the monolithic operating systems did not segregate. Okay, did not segregate what? The modes in which CPU is operating, either kernel mode, which is higher privilege mode, or the user mode, which is lesser privilege mode. Okay. So what is happening? There is a mode switch which is involved. Say your OS calls a resource, OS critical service calls is running on a kernel mode, but there is something which is running on a user mode, which is a dependency for this process or the task to finish. Then the CPU will keep hopping between user and kernel modes, different modes. It will keep hopping. So what was happening is there was a mode transition overload happening in the time when we broken down the OS to run only the critical services on kernel mode and the rest of the operating system in user mode. Then we resorted to client server model in which certain services within the OS were started to run on this kernel mode and which were servers. And then there was then there was clients which used to access these using API calls. That is why DLL files are there. So many DLL files are there in the Windows operating system. because those are shared resources. Similarly, there were processes which were shared across multiple programs and which were dependencies of multiple programs, and hence running those on a privileged mode and then allowing access to user mode programs to those programs which are running in kernel mode through a restricted or restrained uh, API access gateway was a better option. So there was too many more transitions, which was causing the lag, which was causing the performance issue. Okay, let's start the discussion on the uh, domain 7, which is security operations. So first of all, in order to understand the day-to-day operations, we have to understand the distinction between your event, incident, and disaster. So before this, we have talked about SIEM, which is security information and event management. This is information, this is event. Okay. What is an event? An event is anything which is happening in your organization or the system that you're monitoring. Anything which is happening in there is an event. For example, I logged onto the system, it's an event. After logging in, I have written a new record in the database, that's an event. I triggered a maybe a performance optimization batch job in the DB, it's again an event. It is again an event. Okay. So all these things which are observable are events. What is an incident then? An incident is which negatively affects your environment. So incident contains a negative connotation to it. Okay. And what is a disaster then? Okay. So say an incident has occurred. Your system is hampered. Your system is negatively affected. And now the availability of the system has gone. So we talk about something called MTPD, which is called maximum tolerable period of disruption. We call MTPD, which is maximum tolerable period of disruption. What does it signify is there is a service which is critical in nature for the business to survive, and there occurred an incident, and the business can survive only till 24 hours that the service is down. After that, there is no point in even resuming that service because the business will go out of business, or there'll be no use for the business to exist if that service remains down for more than 24 hours. So this time is called an MTPD, maximum tolerable period of disruption. Is when is still when the business can afford to uh, have a service down, have a critical service down, and every service can have different MTPD levels. That is what we figure out during our this disaster recovery planning. So that is what MTPD is. And any incident which causes your system to remain down beyond MTPD, or which causes it to remain down significantly, is your disaster. Okay. So that is the distinction between events, incidents, and disaster. And whenever a incident occurs, it triggers a uh, proceeding, legal or regulatory proceeding. Okay. What happened in case of HDFC banks? RBI has put a restriction on them to not issue any more credit cards because they were not having the proper DR setups and there were outages in their services. Okay, so that was an incident. Outages. Okay, outage in the service was an incident, which has led to a regulatory repercussion. There was a regulatory repercussion, which was RBI in this case. So every time your services get hampered, or every time you have an incident, and since you are regulated, or you have a policy or some legality within which you operate, your organization operates. So every time something like that happens, some incident happens, you're supposed to report that incident to somebody, and the oversight body, the body to which you report that incident to, may take necessary actions against you. For such cases, you'll have to preserve the evidences in order to fight your case in the court of law, or maybe in front of the regulatory authority, or whatever the nature of the proceedings is. Okay, so that is where the evidences come. What is evidence? Evidence basically is uh, anything, any document, any interview, any say an evidence can be a testimony of somebody who was there in the operations on that, on the period, at the time of incident, occurrence of the incident, or maybe any physical media which was containing the software program or something. Maybe there's a malware attack or something like that happened in your environment, and any system, any uh, servers, maybe VM instances containing data or evidences pertaining to evidence is basically something which can help the uh, oversight body to resolve the case. So evidences are something which can be physical, which can be when these are physical, it is called a real evidence. Say an HDD, it's a real evidence. Then your servers itself is a real evidence. Your files, your policies, procedures, any document which is there, it's a real evidence. What is a direct evidence? A direct evidence is, say you interviewed somebody and you have a testimony of that person, then that testimony is a direct evidence, which is directly availed from the source itself. Okay. Now, there's a popular principle associated with this is called a Locard. It's called a Locard's principle. Locard's principle, what it states is, when a criminal attempts a crime, he takes something and leaves something behind. So this leaves something behind part is your evidence. Okay. Okay. Now sources of evidence can be oral. It can be oral, like you take an interview, you record a testimony. That is your oral evidence. You can have documents, which are evidences. You can have digital forensics. Digital forensics come in their own multitude of shapes and sizes. For example, it can be any digital forensics is basically something stored in your information system, in your systems which are digital, which are computer like environments. Okay, so it can be volatile in nature, it can be non-volatile in nature, or it can be a virtual instance of some sort. So what is a volatile thing? Whatever is stored in your RAM is volatile, or whatever is stored in a volatile memory. RAM is basically an example of volatile memory. So what is a volatile memory? As soon as you power off the system, as soon as you remove the voltage, the memory will vanish. So that is a volatile memory. A non-volatile memory is something which persists even after removal of power. So that is an HDD or solid state drive is an example of non-volatile memory. So digital forensics can be of volatile in nature, non-volatile in nature, as well as it can be a virtual instance. What is the most important thing is, as soon as you're hit by an incident, please do not turn off any of the affected machines. Instead, what you can try is you can isolate it from network, keep it on, because as soon as you turn it off, all the evidences stored in the volatile memory will vanish. So please never turn off your systems as soon as they are hit by any incident, because you lose all the volatile forensics from it, digital forensics from it. So that is your sources of evidences. And in case of VMs, the good thing about it is you can simply take snapshots. What is snapshot? Snapshot is basically everything. Like you basically make a copy of that computer which is there in the VM, and you can restore the VM from that snapshot whenever you require in the similar kind of environment. For example, if you're running VMware ESXi platform, that is a bare metal virtualization platform. So whatever VM snapshots that you make within ESXi can be restored easily in an ESXi based environment. One can also convert one form of a snapshot from one platform to another platform. For example, VMware ESXi to Microsoft Hyper-V. That is possible, but that may be difficult, and also that may distort your evidence. And since you're collecting evidence, we shall always remember the best evidence rule, which is also documented in Indian Evidences Act of 1872. Section 114 deals with best evidence rule. What is best evidence rule? Best evidence rule simply states that whatever evidence which is closest to the source is the best evidence. So for example, a server is hit by a malware attack and it was a virtual server. So you take a snapshot, it is closest to the source. Unlike you taking a replica of it over a network. So that is away from source. Instead, if you take a snapshot on the virtualization platform itself, that will be closest to the source. So whatever evidence that you collect closest from the source is the best evidence, and which is also documented in Indian Evidence Act 1872, section 114. If you want, you can refer to it. Although it is not, since it was written in 1872, it does not correctly translate to the e-discovery or with the digital forensics, but it'll still give you an idea as to what is the best evidence rule. Best evidence rule is mostly commonsensical, that you shall try to uh, take an evidence which is close to the source. Now, collecting evidence can be, as I mentioned before, collecting evidence, you can collect it from, if it is a oral statement, you can collect a testimony. If it is a document, you can collect the document. If it is a digital something, you can either collect it from RAM, or in case of SDDs, generally bit-to-bit replicas are made, and nothing, the original hard disk of the affected system is not even touched. So you make a bit-to-bit replica of it, you hash the replica to ensure the integrity of the data. You hash it here, you hash it here, compare the hashes. If hashes match, that means the integrity is maintained, and hence you can prove that the quality of your evidence is at par. So that is the kind of things that you should take care of while uh, collecting the evidences. Okay, then what e-discovery is? E-discovery is basically correcting digital forensics. When a court orders you to uh, collect evidence, uh, you collect the evidences from the environment which was affected. Generally, e-discovery contains a few steps, which basically which basically falls under something like this three-step procedure. You identify the evidences, you collect the evidences, and then you process it, because you don't need to give any excess information to anybody. Okay, so you identify the information that needs to be collected, then you actually collect it, then you process it to modify any excess info, to remove any excess information, and keep it in context to the case in question. Okay, so that is what the process of e-discovery looks like. Then the rules of evidence. So any evidence that you collect must have these properties, which is it must be authentic, accurate, complete, reliable, and admissible. What does these things mean? Authentic means that your evidence, whatever you're presenting, must serve to the case that you're trying to present. For example, if a system is hit by malware, which has caused a data loss to the users, and then the users have sued your company. Now, if you present your policy, which states that every system must be running anti-malware program, that may not help your case that much, as that anti-malware was sitting on on the system which was affected. It was continuously updated, and you present the evidence of that. Or maybe this system was reporting, this antivirus agent was reporting to some central repository or central management platform. From there you can pull the evidences and present as to, okay, the system was running an antivirus which was updated constantly, and hence it is authentic in nature, it relates to the case that you're presenting. It must be accurate. that basically means the integrity of the thing is maintained. For example, as I've told you, when we are collecting evidences from an HDD, we generally make a bit-to-bit replica of it instead of directly working on this. So make a bit-to-bit replica of it, hash it, compare the hashes. You'll see whether the integrity of the data is maintained between these two copies or not. So accuracy basically deals with the integrity of the material that you're presenting or the evidence that you're presenting. Then it must be complete. What completeness means is basically you collect everything from the environment, because you don't know if the next moment it is going to get wiped out or not. So don't take any chances. You collect everything from there. Now, reliability. Reliability basically means that A, your method of collection can be explained and be defended in the court, and B, the evidence itself can be defended. For example, the example that we have taken of malware, it shall be established. Maybe take example of a GUID. Maybe your this is the server, this is the central management server, and this anti-malware agent assigns a GUID for this particular installation on this server, this particular installation of this agent on this server, and hence it binds this unique GUID to this server. And hence, when proving the reliability of the evidence that you're presenting from that you have fetched from the central management platform, you can simply defend that, okay, this agent assigns a unique GUID to all the installations that happens, or whenever an agent is installed on a server, it assigns a unique GUID to that installation, and hence it is related to whatever logs that I'm presenting from the central management server are still pertaining to the particular agent installed on the server which was affected in the incident. So reliability is that you can defend or prove that the evidence is what it says to be. And then admissible, basically it can be used in the court of law. So again, it is very commonsensical that if it shall not be out of context, A, that whatever evidence that you're presenting, it shall be in context and shall help your case. That is what mostly admissibility is. Now the types of your repercussions can be, it can be criminal, civil, regulatory, or administrative. Remember uh, in the first domain, we talked about legal systems of different countries or different legal systems that are there. So it is like that only. So whatever oversight body is there, for example, RBI is a regulatory authority. So whatever terms and conditions which your organization is bound by, which are enforced by RBI, if you are found to be breaching those terms and conditions, there'll be a regulatory penalty. Similarly, if there is an administrative body in your locality, or if there is any says local civic body which enforces some controls, some regulations which your organization is bound by, then breaching those will attract a administrative action. Okay. Similarly, your civil and criminal actions. So whatever kind of law that you breach, uh, your repercussions will be mapped accordingly. Then we come to the incident response. So we have talked about what is an incident. Anything which negatively impacts your organization, any event which negatively impacts your organization is an incident. Now your organization doesn't want to remain unavailable for too long, because it is a business and it is supposed to send like bring some service to the customers, and it can not remain out of the market for too long. So that is why we need an incident response mechanism. So whenever you talk about incident response, you'll always start with detect. You'll have to first detect that some incident has occurred. Unless you detect an incident, it will keep on propagating in your environment and you'll never be able to kickstart your mitigation, or you will never be able to respond to it. It is like not agreeing that there is a problem. So the detection basically is agreeing that there is a problem. Okay, that acknowledging that there is a problem in the environment. So first of all, detect. How do we detect? maybe use an IDS, intrusion detection system. It can be network based, host based, wherever you're putting it, wherever you're putting the sensors. It can be your anti-malware sensor, which it can be your anti-malware program, which sends out alert whenever it detects something which is not in line with your corporate policies that you enforce using that antivirus program. So first, the incident response starts with detection. Then you respond to it. Basically, you assess the expanse of the effect of that particular incident. So in response, you figure out what are all the things which are affected. Then in mitigate, you contain the spread. For example, if there is a network attack happening in your environment, you can try isolating the particular segment which is being attacked, and that will contain the attack within that network segment. So mitigation is basically containment, and reporting is a continuous process. It will run throughout this whole procedure, because reporting is basically documenting. And also reporting, we shall remember two things in reporting. First is, it is documentation. So documentation is always very important. And second is, you are supposed to assign a SPOC. What is a SPOC? SPOC is a single point of contact. So why do we need a SPOC? Why do we need a SPOC? Because say it is a major incident, there's a fire outbreak, or there is a breach happened in and you're a bank, and anybody is releasing any statement to the press. So it will basically cause more panic in the market, and it will incur you a greater damage to the brand. Or yeah, it will make a bigger impact in your brand reputation. So we need a SPOC, which will one person will be officially assigned with the responsibility of releasing any statements or communicating between the inner and outer world. So your organization and your outer world, there'll be one person who will be responsible for all the communications. So in reporting, you remember two things. You have to have a SPOC, you have to have documented everything which has happened. Then recovery is basically back to normal. Okay. So in mitigate, you have in respond, you have contained it. In mitigate, you have restored it to some part. And in recovery, you basically restore it to full operational capacity. For example, if you're a bank, there is a transaction system which was affected, and before the incident, it was processing 1 lakh transaction per minute. Then recovery means that it shall be restored to the fullest capacity. That means it shall be operating at 1 lakh transactions per minute again after the recovery step, which generally requires a DR plan or of some sort. Okay, that we'll discuss in a few moments. Then your remediation is basically trying to uh, understand the root cause. It's like a RCA. So you do a root cause analysis. That is your remediation step. And finally, you log everything that you've learned here in the KEDB, known error database, or you must maintain a case log as to these are all the things which have happened, and this has caused this. So that you have a cause and effect relationship for the future to prevent such things. So it basically deals with prevention of things, remediation. Then let's talk about malware. So malware is uh, a combination of malicious and software. So anything which is there with a malign intention is a malware, which is not there for a predictive outcome, is a malware. Malware can be of many types. The most common is viruses. How is it different from everything else? Is it requires manual triggering. So unless you trigger a virus, it won't activate. What is a worm? Worm is a self-propagating thing, so it is able to propagate itself across the network. Lateral spread is very high in worms, so that is how it is different from everything else. What is a macro virus? What is a macro malware is? Macro is a programming language, programming interface kind of stuff, which the most abundant example of it is use of macro in MS Excel. So that is what it is related to. Polymorphic is uh, the kind of malware which changes its behavior. Maybe it may look like something at some point in time and something else at some point in time, some other point in time. So it is basically used to uh, evade the signature based protection. So what signature based protection is, it have it has a database of known behavior of how a malware acts, and hence it can block or restrict or contain the malware. And this is signature based protection is generally offered by an antivirus solution. So polymorphic malwares are basically designed to evade those signature based protections. Now Trojan is what Trojan is. I mean, you have heard of Trojan horse, the story of Trojan horse. Basically Trojans are something Trojans are the application, the kind of malware which at the outside look as if they are for a different purpose, but inside there is a malware. So on the outside, it will look like as if it is a very useful solution, maybe a known solution also. Maybe you have downloaded a VLC media player from an unknown website, and it is containing a malicious piece of code to it instead of VLC media player. So that is what a Trojan is. Then botnets are basically used for DDoS or any kind of distributed attacks. DDoS is distributed denial of service. So what botnet is um, regular PC, say my PC or your PC, which is infected by a threat actor, and it has not been actively used. Um it is dormant, and as soon as the threat actor wants to launch an attack on somebody on a distributed as soon as a threat actor wants to launch an attack, a distributed kind of attack on any entity, it will call all the computers which it had infected before, the zombie systems, and activate the botnet. So botnets are basically computers which are connected to internet, which in which the exploit is running in a passive mode. It is not active. It is not actively affecting the computer itself, but it can be used in future to wage attacks on other entities. So botnets are basically network connected computers which are already infected. What is a boot sector malware is? It writes itself in MBR, master boot record. So it loads before the operating system can load, and hence any evasive method, any counter method which OS may be using is bypassed. And that is why we have secure boot in Windows, which basically validates the integrity of the drivers that the Windows operating system is loading. Now logic bombs are generally intentional in nature, and it is generally some piece of a logic which is left in the software, which is triggered at when the logic times out. For example, uh, if I'm a software engineer and my company is kicking me out and I was finalizing a software for them, I'll put down some piece of code in the software that after the day I'm leaving the company, within 3 days, it will launch a botnet attack or something. So you make a IFTT within that. If this, then that kind of a argument, you write it down in the software piece of software, and that is a logic bomb. So you write down a logic, and that logic triggers an action, an adverse action. So that is a logic bomb. What is a ransomware? You restrict access, so your availability is lost unless a ransom is paid. The most popular way of doing it is encrypting all your files using a symmetric key, and then giving you symmetric key back only when you provide them with certain bitcoins or something, which because bitcoins are not traceable back to the, because it is pseudonymous in nature. Then you have rootkits. Rootkits basically exploit the privilege escalation. So they gain higher privilege in the OS itself, and then they can have wider access to the resources available. Then we have adwares and spywares. Adwares show advertisements, pop-ups, which are basically annoyance. Spywares basically are there to collect intelligence. Then you have data diddlers. Data diddlers are very minor changes in the data, which are generally uh, not taken very seriously, and which eventually leads to a huge data leakage. What salami attack is? Salami attack is somewhat connected to data diddling, which is basically changing a little bit of figures in your bank accounts and whatnot. So those are salami attacks. What is zero-day attack? Zero-day attack is something which is out there in the wild for which is not already known. So we have talked about CVE, common vulnerability uh, and exposure. I don't remember the expansion of CVE. So CVE is basically an identity number assigned to any vulnerability which is found. So anything which is not yet publicly disclosed is an zero day, and 0 days are most difficult to defend against them because it is not known and there's no remedial action known also in the public. So that is what 0 day is. Then we come to this patch management process. Why do we need patch management? Because of obviously these vulnerabilities which are there in our which are there in the softwares or applications that we use, and hence every OSD, which is original software developer, keeps on releasing patches and at different intervals. Now, there can be two approaches to it. One can be managed, and one can be unmanaged. What managed is, uh, in case of managed or centralized, what you do is there is a central server to which all the other server. These are your server 1, server 2, server 3, and this is my patch management server. So it talks to internet. Just a second. Yeah, sorry guys. So this patch management server talks to internet and fetches a catalog from all the service providers. For example, I'm using Adobe in my environment. I'm using Microsoft Word in my environment. I'm using Microsoft Windows as the operating system. Then I'm using Visual Basics, maybe, whatever. So it collects the relevant patches on a regular interval from the internet and pushes those patches to all the servers which are connected with this server, with the patch management server. So this is managed approach. And unmanaged approach is when users are installing patches on ad hoc basis. So that is an unmanaged approach. Then it can be manual or automated. For example, in case of manual, automated generally is implemented in low risk environments which are not very critical. So every time a patch is released, something about the software is changed. So it is possible that the software may not work as it was working before, and there may be some changes that are needed to be done to ensure interoperability or the similar behavior. And for that, we do regression testing, we do integration testing, and whatnot. Okay, so automated patching means that as soon as the patch is available, you push it automatically to the machines, to the affected machines. And this can be done on low risk environments, for example, end user machines, which are of low risk. On a high risk environment, we do a manual patching. We prefer to do a manual patching before which we test out all the possible scenarios. We fetch the patches, we test it out in a sandbox maybe, which is similar to the actual environment. And once we see that it is working as expected, we release the patch. So that is your manual method of patching. And every time the patch management is complete, you update the baseline. So you write the baselines based on the build of operating system and build of applications that you're using. And hence, every time your build is updated, you have to update the baseline also, because it is a point in time metric. A point in time, it contains point in time data, and you can refer to the CIS. CIS baselines are very popular. You can refer to this if you wish to understand more about it. Now, proactive assessment is required. For proactive assessment, what we can do is we can subscribe to threat intelligence. We can run vulnerability scans. basically VMT vulnerability management we can do. So what happens is you load a specific requirement in the scanner application, and you connect all your assets or your servers to this vulnerability scanner server, and it, based on the template that you load here, based on the compliance requirement, it will scan what is the state of compliance of your assets, and accordingly it will suggest what patches shall be deployed in your environment. So that is what a proactive method is. So you proactively assess whether a patch is required in your environment or not. A reactive approach will be once your system is hacked because of a vulnerability, or once an incident has occurred because of vulnerability in the system, you patch it. So that is a reactive approach. A more proactive approach is you constantly do vulnerability assessment and patch it accordingly. Then you have change management process. So whenever you uh, introduce any change in your environment, and particularly patch management, which introduces change in a very frequent manner. For example, Microsoft releases patches on every second Tuesday. So Tuesday of every month. So this is at least one change that you need to do in all the environment if you're running any Microsoft Windows based solution platform. Then this is something that you need to do on monthly basis. So patch management generally triggers a change management also, because you're changing something in your environment. And how does the change management process look like? You request the change, it will be evaluated by the stakeholders, then you plan how to implement the change, and then you actually implement the change. And after that, you validate whether the changes have been successful. Once the changes are successful, you update the baseline and you update the version. So that is how change management looks like. Changes can be of three types or more, maybe depending upon the need of the organization. And a standard change is a regular change management flow, a change in for which a, typical change management flow is already drafted. An emergency change, for example, a zero-day vulnerability is found and there is a mitigation method, maybe changing some value in the registry or changing some value in the configuration file, is released by the vendor itself. So for that, you need an emergency change management. So that may be a very straight through process. You may not be required to obtain approval from many people, and hence it will be faster. And that is why the emergency change management. And then the normal changes. So all type of changes require different kind of change management and approval chains. For example, one will require approval from only 2 or 3 people, one may require approval from hundreds of people. And generally, emergency change managements are there to reduce the operational overhead in the entire change management process, so that you can implement the changes which are emergency in nature as soon as possible. Then you have change control board and change advisory board. Change advisory board and change control board, how does it uh, differ in nature is, CCB, change control board, is specific to a single project or a single operation. CAB is applicable to entire organization. And similarly, ECAB is emergency change advisory board, and it is again pertaining to the emergency changes which are required to be done in the entire organization. Cool, so far so good. Now we come to backup. Backup can be, so yeah, when it comes to backup is very important, because once you, maybe if you're hit by a ransomware attack, you can simply take the data from the backup site and restore it on the servers, and format these servers, or maybe decommission it altogether if you wish to, whatever your organization's disaster recovery plan says. Okay, so that is why backups are important. In case your data is compromised, you can simply resort back to your backups, and backups are very, very, very important. It can be a mirror is basically uncompressed replica of this. So this is a server, this is a mirror of it at a geographically separate location. So say it is hit by this geographical location is hit by a natural disaster, still your backup will be preserved because it is located in a separate geolocation. So that is what mirroring is. It is advisable to keep your backup locations geographically separated from your actual location, your production location. Okay. Mirroring is uncompressed, full is compressed. Same as mirroring, all the data is replicated, but it is compressed, and mirroring is not compressed to save time. So mirroring is very fast, full is a little bit taxing on time. It takes some time in full. And there is one important concept of archive bit here. So what archive bit tells is, if it is 0, it means that archiving is not required. If it is 1, it means that backup is required. So it is important in incremental and differential backups. Incremental backup, what it means is, once you have done a full backup, your archive bit is set to 1 for everything, like everything is backed up now. And whatever is changed in your system will be backed up now. So that is incremental backup. Incremental backup are smallest in size. So only the things which are changed in your environment will be backed up. Differential backup, this is your full backup. First day, there's this much change. The next day, this change plus whatever changed this second day will be backed up. Third day, this change plus whatever has changed on third day will be backed up, and so on and so forth. So this is differential backup. In addition to whatever was changed today, the things from the previous day will also be carried forward. So that is your differential backup. Then one thing, verification of your backup is very important, because you're relying on your backup just too much, and hence you shall keep on restoring from your backups periodically, and to see whether your backups are in good shape. Now storage shall be done on a geographically separate location for obvious reasons. That one region, if one geographical location is hit by a natural calamity, your primary and backup both will get lost. So it is better to store a copy at a separate geolocation. Then backup tape rotation strategies. There can be 3 type of backup tape rotation strategies. And why do we need that is because we cannot keep on using new backup tapes for every time we start a backup. And that is what FIFO basically is. FIFO says that if we do not have a backup tape rotation strategy, then say my organization requires to keep a backup of up to 365 days, and I do a full backup daily, then I'll require 365 tapes in order to have this, to meet this requirement. What FIFO says that this is my stack of backup tapes 1 to 30, and my organization requires to keep the backup of up to 30 days only. So that is why I've kept 30 backup tapes only here. That is why I kept 30 backup tapes. And as soon as I reach the 30, the 31st day's backup will be recorded on the first backup tape. So that is first in, first out. Then you have GFS, grandfather, father, son. That is basically based on that is basically segregation of rolls of tape based on the age of backup which is stored in it. So if you're taking daily backups, that will be your son. Your weekly backups will be called father. Your monthly backup will become grandfather, and so on and so forth. Maybe your half yearly backup becomes grandfather, great grandfather maybe. So that is how it is. Then you have Tower of Hanoi. Basically, Tower of Hanoi says that it is like this. It is basically says that if you're using 3 sets of tapes, then the number of days the last tape will be rotated will be 2 raised to the power 3 minus 1, which is 4. And how it works out in real life is you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 days, 8 days maybe. Chalo. You have 8 days, and you have 3 tapes. So what will happen in Tower of Hanoi strategy is your A tape will go like this. Your B tape will go every second. Sorry. Your B tape will repeat every 4th day. And similarly, your C tape will also repeat every fourth ray. We will come here. C will come here. Like this. Then you have redundancy, clustering, and fault tolerance. What redundancy means is you have excess hardware. So, for example, we have two power supplies, one connected to UPS 1, other connected to UPS 2. That is your redundancy. Then you have on hard disk level, you have RAID. It can be 0, 1, 5, 10. What is 0? 0 is mirroring. So whatever data you're writing on hard disk, there'll be a copy of it stored here, another copy of it stored here. So, sorry, 0 is stripping. Sorry, guys. So RAID 0 is stripping. So if I have A, A will be broken down to A1, A2. And there is, if you see, there is no redundancy. If I lose one disk, I lose half of the data, and hence the whole full file will not be readable. So it improves the speed, but it is not redundant. RAID 1 is mirroring. So if I have A, it will be stored on both the hard disks. Hence, it works on redundancy fully. What is RAID 5? RAID 5 is your parity. So in case of RAID 0, you have minimum 2 disks required. In case of stripping, again, you have 2 disks. This is 0 is stripping, you have 2 disks required. In case of 1, again, you have 2 disks required. In case of parity, what happens is you're storing A. A will be broken down to A1, A2, and parity of A. Okay. So on first disk, half of your, this is strip and parity. So on first disk, half of your data will be stored. Second disk, half of your data will be stored. And the XOR of this will form a parity, which will be stored in the third disk. So that is how RAID 5 works. It requires minimum 3 disks. And then comes RAID 10, which is nothing but combination of RAID 1 and 2. So what happens is, this is how, okay, RAID 10. Let me, this is RAID 10. This is how it looks. So your data, if you have AB, if you have A, and if you have B, you're writing AB. A will go here, B will go here. There'll be mirroring before stripping. Okay, so if you're writing AB, your A1, B1 will come here. Again, A1, B1, a copy of it will come here, and A2, B2 will come here, and a copy of A2, B2 here. So it again requires 4 disks. So RAID 0 and 1 require minimum 2 disks. RAID 5 requires 3 disks minimum, and RAID 10 requires minimum 4 disks. RAID 0 is best for performance, but there is no redundancy. RAID 1 is best for redundancy, but since you're simultaneously writing on 2 disks, the performance is a bit lower than stripping alone. And then 5 and 10 are similarly, as I've explained before. 5 is stripping only, so it will be obviously faster than 10, which is stripping and mirroring. And there are multiple combinations of it also. And there is RAID 50, which is stripping and parity. So on and so forth. You can go on like that. Now clustering. What clustering is? Similar to redundancy. In clustering, in case of redundancy, what was happening is, in case of redundancy, not both of the systems are used together. So as I've told you that there is a power supply which is connected to UPS 1, another is connected to UPS 2. In clustering, in redundancy, you're not using both simultaneously. Only one is active at a time. In clustering, what happens is both are active simultaneously. So the best example of clustering is, there is an LB, there are multiple servers, web servers maybe, which are behind this LB. And whenever a user request comes, there is an algorithm running on the LB which assigns the thread this particular request to particular server. So all the servers are being simultaneously used. That is the only difference between clustering and redundancy. Clustering is primarily used to improve the performance, as well as if in case something, one of these three servers goes down, the rest of the two servers can be sized to accommodate for the loss of that one server. So it can also be used to achieve high availability. So all these things are used for achieving high availability, which is nothing but ensuring that your system is more robust and the availability part of the CIA triad is increased for that system. Now, fault tolerances, similar to parity, a system which is fault tolerant can function despite there being some fault in that. So it can recover from faults, or it can continue running with reduced performance. Now you can have multiple type of recovery sites: a cold site, warm site, and hot site. All of these are in the increasing order of cost to maintain it, and decreasing order of increasing cost and decreasing of time to recovery. Okay, so your RTO is reducing and your cost is increasing in this direction. So your cold site is something where there is just one uh, big room, that's it, nothing else. So whenever a disaster is hit, you move your uh, network infrastructure, you move your compute infrastructure, you move your human resources, you build the HVAC, everything, and then you can restore the function. A warm site is where your HVAC is already present, all the backhaul links are already connected, electricity is there. You need to bring your systems and your people in order to start functioning. A hot site is where you don't have the people, but everything else is functional. So as soon as your people come in, you can start operating from a hot site. What is a redundant site is? A redundant site is an exact replica of this. So there are people, compute, power, network, everything here as well as here in almost the same capacity sometimes even. What is a mobile site? Mobile site is like a hot site on wheels. Okay, so it is a hot site on wheels. Now we talk about business continuity management. What is business continuity management is the whole aim of security operations is secure business in order for it to keep functioning. So in business continuity management, we first of all start with BIA, which is business impact analysis. In that we identify the key activities that the business that are required for the business to continue functioning in a profitable manner, or at least in a for it to continue functioning. Okay. Once we identify the key activities, we rate the criticality on everything, whatever RTO, RPO requirements. We figure out 4 key parameters here, which is RTO, RPO, your MTD, and your WRT. Okay, these are the 4 parameters that we figure out here. What is an RTO? So say this is your system which is operating normally. This is your operation. This is where the disaster hits. This is where you recover the system. And this is where you get out of business, lose everything. Okay. So this part is your recovery point objective, which is basically measured in minutes of data loss. So amount of data that I can lose in terms of minutes. So say there's a system which is processing 1 lakh transactions per minute, and I'm willing to lose 1 minute worth of data. That is 1 lakh transactions I'm willing to lose. So that becomes my RPO for this system. Now, since I say that RPO is 1 minute, I'll my backup strategy or my sync strategy will be such that it replicates all the data from this site, from the production site to a recovery site or a backup site within this 1 minute in order to comply with the RPO requirements. What is an RTO is? An RTO is the time you take in minutes to recover this particular system. That is your RTO. And this is your MTPD, maximum tolerable period of disruption. as I've stated in the beginning only, that MTPD is when you get out of business. Okay, sorry. MTPD starts from disaster. Okay, disaster hit and you get out of business. That is your MTPD. And between this and this, the disaster hit and you recovered, is your work recovery time. So the time you take to parameterize everything to the normal is your work recovery time. That is WRT. So based on these four parameters, we formulate the BCP and DRP, which is business continuity plan and disaster recovery plan. How these two are different, we have talked in the first session also. Business continuity focuses on the continuity of operations of business activity. For example, your HR operations or anything per se continues to operate. What disaster recovery is, once some incident is categorized as a disaster, then you recall it, you do the recovery. That is where your disaster recovery comes into picture. Okay, that is where your DRP comes in. Now you have testing. So once you've planned it out, you need to test your plans, because not everything planned. Once you actually get hit by the disaster, things change. So say, for example, there is a attack on your organization and you have planned very well that, okay, I have an intrusion prevention system which will prevent everything from happening. I have an anti-DDoS in the perimeter, which will filter volumetric data, volumetric attacks and whatnot. But when an actual incident occurs, it may occur from something you have not seen before, or it may so happen that there was an undocumented change that you didn't know of. So that is why we shall keep on testing our thesis hypothesis. So what checklist says is, you are the one who has drafted the plan and you read it out and figure out if you have left anything. That is checklist. What is walkthrough? You call in all the stakeholders and see if there is something that can be improved. What is a simulation? Simulation is when you give them a situation. There are stakeholders, you give them a situation, and then you capture the reaction, or if the plan works. Then parallel testing is, your primary site is working, same at the same time you activate the DR site also and test whether, and move some of the workload here and see if it is working as expected. A full interruption is, you take down the primary site and you run all the operations from disaster recovery site itself. So this is your testing. Now coming to restoration. So when restoring things, obviously it is again commonsensical. You have to prioritize things. So you have already identified your key activities in BIA. You have already identified the criticality of the services that you're dealing with. So that is from where you can prioritize things. Dependency is maybe one service is dependent on other. For example, there is a UPI, Unified Payment Interface, which depends on the CBS, core banking services. Unless the core banking solution is live, no transaction can be catered from here. So if my UPI is having, say, RTO of 5 minutes, then my CBS shall come up within those 5 minutes. So it shall come up within, say, 5 minutes, 2 minutes, or one. Because if something hits UPI and CBS both, I'll have to first recover the CBS in order for UPI to function. So once the CBS is online, then only the UPI people can validate whether the platform is performing as expected or not. So if it is having the RTO of 5 minutes, it shall all the dependent services must have the RPO lesser than the service which depends on it. And remember one thing, that MTPD will always be the biggest number of all. Then will be the RTO, and then will be the RPO. Okay. It is a thumb rule that your MTPD will always be the greatest, then your RTO, then your RPO. So with this, we have finished the things that I wanted to discuss with you about the domain 7. And these are the major topics which are which from where the questions will be asked in the actual CISSP test. Moving on to the questions pertaining to this domain, we can take a pause. We can take your questions if you have any. You can unmute yourself now. and then we'll start the questions today. You guys can unmute yourself now.
Hey, Chandra, Sumi this side. Hey, can you repeat two terms? One is like MTPD and
MTPD.
these two topic.
MTPD and
Tower of Hanoi, the one.
Tower of Hanoi. So what Tower of Hanoi is, if it's a game, it's an ancient game in which there used to be a tower and then there'll be discs of varying sizes. So it is a tape rotation strategy, and we need tape rotation strategy because we cannot, we do not have unlimited resources. So we do not have a limitless supply of tapes, and that is where the Tower of Hanoi comes into picture. In case of Tower of Hanoi, the basic rule of thumb is if you use, there'll be sets of tapes. Say you use 4 sets of tape, 4 tapes you're using, then the rotation of last tape will occur at 2 raised to power 4 minus 1 n minus 1, which will be 8. And how it will happen is you're using 4 tapes, so you have day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5, 6, 7, so on and so forth. And you're using 4 tapes, so there'll be an A, B, C, and D. First tape you used here, then on the second, then every other day. So the first tape always is used every other day. Second tape is used here. Third tape is used every 4th day.
Okay.
C. And D will be used every 8th day. Something like this.
All right.
Cool. And MTPD is basically the maximum tolerable period of disruption. So disruption basically is disaster. So when your disaster hits, the longest period of time till the service comes back up and the business doesn't lose everything is MTPD. Okay.
That can be empty maximum tolerable downtime also, or it is the
Yeah, it is the same. It is, both are the same.
Okay. And my last question is only checklist. If you can make it clear again, I did not
Checklist,
understand.
say
How do
I'm
you
the owner
identify?
of, say I'm the owner of a solution, and I say that my RTO, based on my RTO RP requirement, there shall be a log shipping between the 2 DB instances every 15 minutes, and there shall be a DB level redundancy at both the at first location. So there'll be 2 DB instances which will be replicated in real time, and then there'll be another DB instance which is running in a DR site, and there's a single instance here. So here we are using this concept of redundancy. This is redundancy, and this is your backup. This is your backup strategy or disaster recovery site. So what is happening? So when I'm drafting a checklist or when I'm drafting a policy for this, I'll say that there'll be a, obviously there'll be 2 DB instances in the DC site, which will be running a real-time replica, and there'll be a 50-minute log shipping between. There'll be log shipping between these 2 instances every 15 minutes. These DCDR instances. So just in case it is hit by something, the RPO will become, my recovery point objective becomes 15 minutes because the shipping is happening between 15 minutes. So the checklist will contain this, and then I'm the author. Since I'm the author, I'll see whether based on my BIA, this activity for which I have drafted this plan, if the RPO is within 15 minutes or not. Because in case my entire DC operations goes down, the only last resort that I'll be having is this DR site, and that is getting replicated in every 15 minutes. If my RPO is say 5 minutes, then I'm non-compliant. So I'll have to bring it down to either 5 minutes, or I'll have to do some alternate arrangement for that. So that is what checklist is. You drafted a plan, you walk through it just to see whether anything is missed or something like that.
Sure. Sure. Thank you. I'm done for today, and I really appreciate your effort. Thank you.
Thank you. We have
Hi,
some
Chandresh.
questions left from this slide. So yeah,
Chandresh, can you explain macro and polymorphic once again?
macro. So in case of macro, you can write in VB some automated routines for Excel and all. So generally what happens is a macro virus, a malicious piece of VB script can be attached to a Excel sheet, maybe XLSX file. And when you, as soon as you execute it, since it executes with the Excel sheet itself, it will run in the same context as the Excel itself. For example, I'll show you the context part because I talk about it a lot. So I'll show you this one thing. In my system, can you see the screen now? Let me share the screen. Just a second. Give me a second. I'll share the screen. Share the full screen basically. This goes down, this stops, and this is the full screen. Okay. Can you see the entire screen now?
I can see the same screen, the slide,
Yeah.
the slide part.
But the entire screen is visible. Okay, cool. Can you see run dialog now?
Yeah.
Cool. Now if I launch, say, device manager, computer manager, device manager, allows device manager, what it will prompt me is you're logged in as standard user, and you can view device settings in the device manager, but you must be logged on as an administrator to make changes, because I have made my user as a standard user and not admin user. So it is warning me about that. Okay. Now, and it is launched like that. I cannot make any changes. If I want to make any changes, I'll have to elevate the changing the settings. I'll have to elevate the privileges, which is I'll have to provide admin credentials. Now, if I go there, type cmd, go to run as admin, and run cmd as admin. So now command prompt is running as administrator command prompt. You can see that. Okay. Now if I launch device management dot msc, am I right? Okay. Now it didn't show me that warning because now it has run as administrator, because see, that change setting wala option is not there anymore. So what has happened is this device management window is now running in the context of this command prompt window, which is running as administrator. So whatever I launch from this command prompt window will be running as administrator. Okay. So that is the basic idea of a context of an application. Okay. So what happens in a macro based virus is since your Excel is a trusted application, it may be allowed to have access to a few more resources than any other application sitting in your machine. Now, any virus which is written, any malicious program which is written as a macro in your Excel sheet will be operating in the same context as the Excel file that you have opened. And since Excel is a trusted application, it is quite possible that your antivirus program or anti-malware program may skip scanning it or something like that. So that is how macro viruses operate, macro malwares operate, and that is how that is the whole concept of context, because your anti-malware trusts that application. It may skip scanning that particular file, and hence it is hazardous in that way. And the polymorphic. So polymorphic, basically, when we talk about signature based protection, so we talked about CVE. So CVE basically is an identity for a vulnerability. And how your signature based protection works is it identifies a threat based on some sort of a signature. A signature is basically a fingerprint of how a virus, a worm, or any malware acts. and that is synthesized in a signature form and loaded in the application for it to keep on scanning the behavior or running processes to see if there's anything which matches the pattern which is already loaded in the form of signature in the application. So what polymorphic does is it keeps on changing its behavior from one kind of a signature to other kind of signature, so that the anti-malware program may not be able to figure out as to, okay, this is a CVE this, or this is a CVE this, because it is constantly changing its behavior. So it won't be able to pinpoint it to one single kind of threat. So that is how polymorphic malwares operate. Any other questions? If you haven't any, then we can move on to the questions from this domain.
Hello. Hello.
Yeah, hi Santosh.
Hi, Sandesh. May I know a practical scenario in which how this offline backups can be maintained in enterprises? If
Okay,
you're
so
having it.
how we used to manage our offsite backups is we used to take daily full backups, and we used to move it to a offsite location which was near DR site.
Okay, thank you.
So that
May I
is one
know?
way of doing it. That was basically
Oh,
FIFO.
okay, okay. May I know the difference between
You're not audible. Can you please come again?
when we are taking the backup,
Hmm.
when we are taking the evidence, we are doing the imaging or cloning, na,
Hmm.
for the evidence. Whether both will have same hash as evidence, or whether hash will be differ for this imaging part because it is compressed.
Because it is compressed, the hash will change. Okay, can we move on to the questions from this domain, 7 domain? Yeah, cool. Somebody has already started answering. Okay, which of the following is not a common component of configuration management change control steps? The time starts now. You have 10 seconds. And most of the people have gotten it right, so we won't bother discussing it. Okay, cool. Moving on to the next one. Which of the following refers to the expected amount of time it will take to get a device fixed and back into production after its failure? Yeah, that is mean time to recovery. Yeah, thanks. Everybody has gotten it right. Okay, third one is RAID systems use a number of techniques to provide redundancy and performance. Which of the following activities divides the write data over several drives? Your time starts now. Okay, guys. Okay, time's up. So what they are talking about is divide the data. So the keyword is divide, okay, and not replicate. Yeah, definitely. Sumit, that is C. So they are dividing the data. They are stripping the data. Cool. Next, move on to the next question. Next set of questions. Joe wants to test a program. He suspects many may contain malware. What technology can he use to isolate the program while it runs? Your time starts now. You have 10 seconds. So yeah, 10 seconds are up and everybody has gotten it right. It is sandboxing. Next one is Melini suspects that someone is using malicious software to steal computing cycles from her company. Which one of the following security tools would be in the best position to detect this type of an incident? Your time starts now. Okay, time's up. Okay, some people have gone with HIDS, one has gone with DLP. DLP talks about data leakage. Okay, so here we are talking about computing cycles and not data leakage. So DLP is not the case here. It is HIDS, intrusion detection, which because it is host based, it will be able to detect whether something malicious is running on the computer itself. Firewall is running on perimeter or network. NIDS is running on network. So it is not, the context is different in firewall and NIDS. HIDS is the right call for this one. The next one is, now that Anne understands that an attack has taken place in place that will violate her organizational security policy, what term best describes what has occurred in Anne's organization? Time starts now. Okay, your time's up. So what has taken place? Okay, violate. Since there is violate written, most of the people have gone with intrusion. It is a security incident because it has violated security policy of the organization, which is negatively impacting the organization. So any event which is negatively impacting the organization is a security incident. Okay, now this is the last one for the day. A storage warehouse facility has been taken over by a corporation that will convert it into a data center handling highly classified information in a private cloud. Fences will be built, cameras will be installed, concrete bollards will be erected, and armed security guard will be patrolling the perimeter at all times. Next generation firewalls, intrusion prevention and detection system, malware scanners, Bell LaPadula operating system, and encryption will protect the service. Policies, procedures, data classification, background checks, credit scores, controlled termination, and general security awareness programs will be applied to all personnel. What approach to security is being coordinated by this corporation? Wow, confused between. Okay, cool. Yeah, everything. Almost everybody has gotten it right. It is a defense in depth because remember we talked about in the beginning itself, PPT, people process technology, and then the kind of controls that are put. In case of people, it is administrative controls. In case of process, it will be technical and physical, and in case of process, it will be administrative. In case of people, it will be physical and administrative, and in case of technology, it will be technical controls. So all kind of controls are being put here, and that is a example of defense in depth and not natural access control. I don't know how. CPTED is physical security. Yeah, crime prevention through environmental deterrence. Yeah, that is. But they are not talking about just the physical controls. No, they have talked about the technical controls also. So they are covering all the three PPT, people, process, technology, which and the controls therein, which is administrative, technical, and what was that? Yeah, Abhi bola tha. Administrative, technical. I don't remember. Sorry. Cool. Uh, with that, we can end this session. Administrative, technical, physical. Okay, yeah. Physical, administrative, and technical. Physical, administrative, and technical. Link for feedback. Just give me a second. That is very important. Good that you guys remember that. That's a good name. Sumit. Good that you reminded me of that. Just give me a second, guys. I'm pasting the link for feedback in the chat box. And yeah, your feedback, as always, is very important because Kapil jots everything down for me in a summary email by the next day.